Hi, my name is Quinn Antus. As Kirby mentioned, I'm with the Colorado Energy Office, and I run our carbon management work. It's great to meet you all. I'm really excited to be here. There's been some incredible information already, and I know that I am standing between a break, so I'll try and keep this as snappy as possible and also hopefully be as helpful as I can be. Just to start us off, there we go. Before getting into some of the meat, I just really quickly want to define our terms around carbon management. I know everyone defines this a little bit differently. For the Colorado Energy Office in the state, we define carbon management as carbon capture, utilization, sequestration, or storage, as well as carbon dioxide removal. For carbon capture, we're really looking at capturing CO2 directly from an emitting source and then transporting it to either use it or store it. And for carbon dioxide removal, we're looking at pulling it directly from the atmosphere to address some of our cumulative emissions, and then similarly using or storing. So for carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, direct air capture is a pretty famous example right now, but it also includes a lot of things that are more nature-based. So things like soil carbon sequestration, or even taking biomass like corn husks or logs and using the embodied carbon in that to make a lot of things like biochar or bio-oil that you inject down through wells. So all of that and more is under the heading of carbon management, and we as a state are now thinking about how we can engage with that in a more strategic manner. Before getting into that, though, I want to really briefly talk about the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Reduction Roadmap 2.0, and Anna actually teed this up super well. But then we'll talk about carbon management overview, particularly in how the state has engaged with carbon management up till now, moving into our existing partnership with the state of Wyoming, the roadmap that we have and are currently developing to guide our future actions for carbon management, what we're doing for stakeholder engagement, and then lastly, some current projects that are in development in Colorado. So to start, Greenhouse Gas Pollution Reduction Roadmap 2.0. You saw a version of this a little bit earlier, but largest source of emissions in Colorado right now is transportation, followed pretty closely by electricity production, industrial production, natural gas and oil, and then buildings and ag both at 10% and a little bit left in waste. And yeah, I think that's it. Statewide goals set by the legislature. In 2019, the Colorado legislature passed 1261, which created greenhouse gas targets based on IPCC research, or the International Panel on Climate Change, the real leading scientific body around climate science. These were actually later updated through SB 2316. So our current reduction targets below 2005 levels put us at 26% by 2025, 50% by 2030, 75 by 2040, and net zero by 2050. And so this roadmap is really trying to help us figure out, how do we get there? How do we do that? You'll see that our historical data, the blue business as usual if we did nothing, the baseline, the green near-term actions, which is reflective of the actions that we've identified as part of Roadmap 1.0 and 2.0, and the stars, which are where we need to be over the next several decades. Looking closely at that, you'll see that we're just a little bit behind on our 2025 and 2030 targets, and there's a pretty significant delta for 2050. And so we're going to have to do a lot more work. I will talk in a minute about where carbon management fits into this, but some key themes that we heard across Colorado as the Energy Office engaged with a lot of different communities. One was prioritize the needs of Coloradans. This is inclusive of affordable housing, reliable and affordable energy, and transportation, reducing local air pollution. Invest in safe streets and reliable public transit. Educate and collaborate with local communities, and allow for flexibility for local implementation. Provide incentives to ease the transition for consumers, businesses, local governments, and communities. And then support workers and invest in workforce development. That's been a huge theme this morning so far. There's a lot of need to support Colorado's workforce. So the updated roadmap, which was released February 26th, identifies 49 near-term actions, which span a lot of sectors, including utilities, transportation, buildings, oil and gas, ag, and natural working lands. Aaron Ray from DNR is going to be providing more information later about specifically the oil and gas near-term actions that came out of this. So I will pause on those for now. If you would like to look at the full roadmap, it's available on the Energy Office website. And now to the role of carbon management in this pollution reduction roadmap. I should flag that the state is primarily working to reduce emissions by transitioning to renewables and electrifying transportation, buildings, and industry. That's really going to be the lion's share of how we're going to meet our 2050 targets. But carbon management is going to play a really important role to help us meet our goals. And this includes all of the things that I talked about right up front. Carbon capture for hard to decarbonize industrial processes, carbon capture for backup gas power generation, and carbon dioxide removal, inclusive of all different nature-based and more tech-based solutions. So, Colorado and carbon management, what's our journey been like so far? This really kicked off in 2019 with the CCUS, the initiation of the CCUS task force, which was a recommendation from the first greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap. And the goal was to identify how CCUS could support Colorado's larger climate target of reducing GHG emissions by 2050. And the result was a series of recommendations focused on enabling and appropriately regulating this industry while addressing equity and community concerns. As a result of the CCUS task force, we are now in the process of pursuing Class 6 primacy from the EPA. The Energy and Carbon Management Commission, which was Colorado's oil and gas regulator, is leading this charge. They are developing our Class 6 application and draft rules. Class 6 is the type of well where you inject CO2. If you are less familiar with that, Mike Rigby from ECMC is going to go into a lot more detail in just a few panels. Last fall, we also CDPHE passed first in the nation industrial decarbonization rules, which requires heavy emitters above 25,000 tons of CO2 per year to achieve a 20% reduction in emissions by 2030. And CCUS and carbon management are eligible compliance pathways. So while we are expecting some electrification projects as part of that, we're also already seeing planning underway for some carbon management, carbon capture projects in partnership with some of Colorado's largest industrial facilities. To support this, to also just support other carbon management projects as well, the state is providing funding through two main vehicles right now. One is the Clean Air Program grants, or $25 million over 5 years for industrial decarbonization projects. If you saw the news, Anheuser-Busch got one of the first large grants to do a really significant steam heat pump, which will reduce their emissions on site by, I think, 78%. It's going to be really incredible. And then the Colorado Industrial Tax Credit Offering, or STITCO, is $168 million in competitive tax credits distributed over 9 years. I will skip this briefly because, better slides right here, Colorado and Wyoming are in a formal partnership. Want to quickly provide an overview of this. Last summer, the state of Colorado signed an MOU with the state of Wyoming to focus on direct air capture and carbon removal. Since signing this MOU, we've really identified 3 key areas of focus. The first being voluntary carbon market infrastructure. Basically, if we're trying to bring more private capital to the table, we need a cohesive market framework that is supportive of the type of investments that we need. And so we are identifying shared policies and frameworks to increase confidence in carbon markets and spur private investment. We're also focusing on measurement, reporting, and verification. That's just something that's come up time and time again as we've worked with a lot of different industry and private sector partners, that there's really no cohesion on how we're measuring, reporting, or verifying some of the carbon management projects that we're looking at. And also, how do you get to a reasonably liquid framework for both soil carbon sequestration and direct air capture? So that's something we're mutually exploring. And then lastly, interstate pore space considerations. There's really good geology for carbon storage that spans the Colorado-Wyoming border. And it'd be a bummer for us to just not have the ability to do those projects because we haven't created alignment about what that looks like. So that's the third piece of this partnership, which all of these are currently in development as we speak. One thing I want to flag here too is we are very good friends with Wyoming, working closely with them on these initiatives, but it's also important for us to stay competitive, particularly as Wyoming is doing a lot of big projects in the carbon management space, and they're making a lot of big investments. Project Bison, which is a direct air capture project, was announced at 5 million metric tons per year, and it's actually the largest direct air capture project announced. They also have the Integrated Test Center, which is a carbon capture and carbon utilization test center, which is playing a role in advancing commercial readiness of carbon management technologies. And then lastly, the Tallgrass Trailblazer pipeline, Tallgrass is converting its Trailblazer natural gas pipeline to be a CO2 pipeline, which is establishing a roughly 400-mile CO2 pipeline to serve as the backbone of a regional CO2 transportation system. This will enable the capture, transport, and permanent storage of over 10 million tons of CO2 per year from Nebraska, Colorado, and Wyoming. And so in support of this, Tallgrass is developing a commercial-scale CO2 sequestration hub in southeastern Wyoming, partially funded by the Wyoming Energy Authority. So we are seeing that even in our closest neighboring states, there's tremendous investment in carbon management, and we want to make sure that we stay competitive in this landscape. All of that brings us to the carbon management roadmap. This roadmap was authorized by legislation passed last year, which directs the Colorado Energy Office to create a carbon management roadmap with the goal of identifying the carbon management, climate, and economic opportunities available in Colorado that best draw on our natural resources, industry, talent, labor force, and economic development capabilities. There are going to be a lot of areas of focus. It is a pretty expansive piece of legislation. We're looking at reforestation, improved forest management, inorganic and organic soil carbon sequestration, agriculture production, carbon capture and removal, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, direct air capture and storage, biomass with carbon removal and storage, enhanced weathering, carbon mineralization, geologic carbon sequestration, carbon utilization, and industrial carbon capture processes. If you don't know what some of those are, come talk to me later. I would love to chat about it. We're also specifically looking for policies and incentives that would attract companies to do more projects in Colorado, that would support the development of new technologies in this space, that would support the development of carbon markets, so we have the type of capital that we need to accelerate the development of this market, that would catalyze private investment, maximize federal investments, support business development and job growth in Colorado, especially in areas impacted by job loss or tax-based loss due to the clean energy transition. What we're finding is that these skill sets are really transferable, particularly to oil and gas workers, and a lot of places with good geology are really co-located with areas that have historical oil and gas production. And so we're finding a lot of really interesting workforce and economic opportunities from carbon management. And also, we want to be able to collaborate with other states, including leveraging shared infrastructure. Also want to assess market risks and opportunities, including the potential interplay between emerging technologies, geothermal being a prime example of that, and then looking specifically at economic opportunities across a wide variety of sectors, including mine reclamation, industrial manufacturing, existing oil and gas infrastructure and workforce, electricity generation, and then the necessary infrastructure, including best reservoirs in the state for CO2, storage, existing carbon dioxide pipelines, and how those pipelines can best be connected with pipelines needed for industrial carbon management. We don't have a lot of CO2 pipelines in Colorado, and so that's something that we're looking at as well. And then infrastructure that allows access to clean energy resources for carbon management projects. And then also, I told you it's a big piece of legislation, accounting and verification measures and protocols, environmental justice standards, fair labor practices and other workforce measures, and then project siting criteria. And we would like to come out of this with an idea around prioritized projects in Colorado. Maybe not specific projects, but the types of projects and where we think they would be best suited based on the variety of factors that we're looking at. Stakeholder engagement. This is a tall order. We can't do this successfully or effectively without engaging with a lot of communities in Colorado. And so this is something that is a big part of our roadmap, but it's also just how we're approaching carbon management in general. We really want to facilitate accessible education. I can't tell you the number of conversations I have where no one has any idea what carbon management is. And so we want to change that. We want to help communities know what are the technologies on the table, how do they work, what does it look like? And also address key community concerns and make sure that we're answering questions in a way that is helpful and also co-creating frameworks to actually support communities in the ways that we need. particularly in relation to some of the key community concerns that were brought up during the greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap process. There are community concerns, and we have enough industry that we can help address some of these concerns by setting this up thoughtfully and effectively. We are also in the process of pursuing federal funding to provide training to local communities and create a workforce development program. Fingers crossed, we find out in July, hopefully. But that potentially would give us a lot of resources to partner with local communities and really scale up interesting and hopefully pretty meaningful workforce dev programs. Also want to chat about CDR projects or CCUS projects currently in development in the state. In the northeast corner, we've got Sterling and Yuma ethanol CCS plants. This was actually the first Class 6 application in Colorado, which is very exciting. Charm Industrial, I alluded to them earlier. They take biomass, they pyrolyze it or burn it at super high temperatures to create a carbon-rich bio-oil and then inject it underground via a Class 5 permit, I think. Global Thermostat is the second largest direct air capture operating facility in the world, so we are honored to have them here. There's a cement plant in Pueblo that is exploring a CCS project. Also, Carbon America, who is here, and School of Mines were selected for a $32 million grant from the Department of Energy to explore developing a carbon storage hub in Pueblo, and so that is underway as well. And then the Southern Ute Tribe is in the process of developing a gas-fired CCS plant. I'll also flag that Colorado State Land Board, which owns a lot of land in Colorado, has 3 current exploration leases to do CCS projects on state lands. And then, overall, broad picture, we have a tremendous amount of CO2 storage potential in Colorado. These are medium estimates, but we anticipate that there's about 131 billion metric tons of saline formation storage resource in Colorado, with about 134 billion metric tons of total storage resource, which positions Colorado as a really strong state for CO2 storage and CO2 sequestration, which is one of the reasons why the state is looking at this and sees a lot of potential within it. That brings me to the end of the presentation. Let's turn it over for questions if there are any, or if people want to go to the break, fully understand. Yeah, I love this question. Oh, and I can reframe it too. Basically, how is the state thinking about MRV, which was measurement, reporting, and verification? Because the EPA is also working on this as well. I'm so deep in MRV these days because we don't want to do that. We don't want to be duplicative to other efforts that are going on. What we've found is that existing standards out there don't align, and there are really significant gaps between what certain agencies are working on, federal government, different state governments. And so what we've been doing is we're actually talking to DOE about this really significantly so that we can align with what the federal government is working on. I think, candidly, I think that if Colorado and Wyoming create our own highly bespoke system, we fail, because then private actors can't really engage with us in a meaningful way. And also, we definitely don't have capacity to reinvent the wheel. So what we're trying to do is we've done a lot of conversations with a variety of actors, people who are buying carbon credits, people who are producing them, people who are researching, people who are at every step of the value chain. And what we found is that particularly for different types of emerging carbon removal, there's really no codified MRV standards. And so what we're trying to do is partner with larger actors to weave these together in a way that makes sense, so that we're not being duplicative, but we're also positioning ourselves to leverage what's out there in a way that can move the market forward. Yeah, we're thinking about that so much, and I would love to chat more about it if anyone else is. But yeah, it's mostly some of the earlier stage technologies, and also just alignment on like open system sequestration. Obviously, we don't do a lot of marine-based CDR in Colorado, but that's a great example. Once you put CO2 into the ocean, how do you measure that? It's the whole ocean. And so getting alignment on some of those types of questions is a big need.
You all raise your hands so we can get to you quickly. Right there. Wait for the microphone, please. If anyone else, raise your hand so we see you early.
Steve Sundberg, City of Aurora, City Council, Ward 2, the only oil and gas producing ward of 6 in Aurora. How do you factor population growth into all your formulation and forecasting? Secondly, is there a danger to this regulation that might push population away or industry like we're seeing in California?
Yeah, great question. So specifically tying that to CCS, I presume? Yeah. So actually, there's a panel later where one of the panelists is exactly an expert in this question. The Energy and Carbon Management Commission released a CCS safety study earlier this year, which is a very robust document that gets into a lot of details about potential impacts, what this looks like. I will say that Class 6 regulation, basically the regulatory process for getting the permit to inject CO2 underground is unbelievably stringent. And as Colorado is in the process of getting the regulatory authority to grant these permits outside of the EPA, we have to demonstrate that Colorado's standards are as stringent, if not more so, than the EPA itself. So what we're finding is that there is actually incredible safeguards in place, but also the technology itself is really well understood and really safe. You know, carbon storage has been happening since the 70s. A leading researcher at Lawrence Livermore, who put out an incredible report called Roads to Removal on CDR, if you're interested, would highly recommend. She and I were chatting recently, and she said, these aren't experiments. These are manipulations. We know exactly what's going to happen. The science is really well understood. And so with that, I think that there's tremendous opportunity to roll out these projects in communities in a way that is really safe. So I don't foresee this having negative impacts on populations, also because the ECMC will be requiring cumulative impact reports. And also if there's any net negative impact demonstrated to communities, permits are going to be denied. So the process itself should really promote very well done projects.